Alright, what's up guys? My name is Zack, and today I am driving a 1992 Ford Thunderbird SC. Up front is a 3.8-liter supercharged V6, and down below is a 5-speed manual transmission. Now, I am super excited to be driving this Ford Thunderbird SC for two reasons. First of all, it's an incredibly well-kept example at about only 68,000 miles. This is as showroom fresh as I could find for a supercharged Thunderbird, but the second reason is that it is supercharged. This was the performance variant of the Ford Thunderbird back in 1992. So not only does it have the supercharged V6, but it also has a 5-speed manual transmission. So today we're gonna be having a little bit of fun on the streets of Phoenix, Arizona. But if you'd like to submit your own vehicle and have it reviewed here on the channel, you can head on over to my website, zackpradel.com/submit. It's a quick and easy submission form. It takes under a minute to fill out, and I come out to you. And if you'd like to see all my videos weeks or sometimes months in advance, you can head on over to my Patreon for only $5 a month. But let's get back to that 3.8-liter supercharged V6. Well, it makes about 210 horsepower, which might not sound like a barn burner. However, it was the most powerful engine you could get. You might not have heard a whole lot. It's not a very loud car, and that would be one of my biggest complaints, is that it actually isn't very showboaty. However, the engine grades of this car were a little bit interesting because it was kind of a crossover technological year, meaning the base model got this engine, the 3.8-liter Essex V6, but then the mid trims got a 5-liter V8, a Windsor V8, but then the top trim went back to the 3.8-liter, but added the supercharger. Now, the supercharged engine does have upgraded internals to better handle the boost and things like that, so it's not the exact same engine. So the base model made 140 horsepower, the V8 made 200 horsepower, and this makes 210 horsepower. But both ends of the spectrum have the 3.8-liter with a 5-liter shoved in the middle. I thought that was interesting. Now, the SC, which stands for Super Coupe, but also supercharged, was the only variant of this generation of Thunderbird to come with a 5-speed manual. And it doesn't feel great. It's very like American 90s. So like if you've driven a Fox body Mustang or SN95, you'll understand how this feels. It's a little bit unforgiving, but it's very firm. It feels more like a gut punch anytime you put it into gear rather than a smooth shifting gear. But that's how shifters were really up until the 2000s, until we started to get more influence from Japanese shifters and we realized how great those were. We didn't really see fantastic shifters in American cars. They're not very smooth, they're not very eloquent. But that's okay, it's doing the job, and I'm rowing my own gears and I like it a lot. There is a lot of clutch travel in order to get it into gear, but again, very characteristic of American cars of the era. Last but not least, the Thunderbird SC is rear-wheel drive. How does it feel to drive the Thunderbird SC? Well, it actually drives pretty good. Besides the unforgiving shifter, it is a nice ride. 210 horsepower is definitely enough to have fun with. You're not gonna be blowing the doors off of anything too much, and this vehicle was actually restricted a little bit because they didn't want it to be faster than the Mustang at the time. So there are ways to modify these cars to get them to be a lot faster than Mustangs, if that's something that you want to do, but this particular one is stock. Visibility is pretty great because it is a 90s car and has thin A-pillars, and the ride quality is good. However, it does have adjusting suspension that we'll talk about how to select a little bit later on. With that stuff out of the way, let's talk about the interior. Well, in front of me, I have 6 gauges. So off to the left is our coolant temperature and speedometer. In the center is our boost pressure and fuel. Love to see that. And then off to the right, we have the tachometer and oil pressure. On the steering wheel, we do have an SC badge, which of course was special for the Thunderbird SC, as one might guess. But we also have cruise control buttons, where buttons on steering wheels weren't really the status quo back in the early 90s. It was nice if you did have them, so cool to see here. Off to the left, we have our headlight switch and climate vent. That's it. And moving on to the door, we have our power mirrors, power locks, and power windows, as well as our Ford JBL sound system. I did not realize that Ford used, or automakers used, JBL sound as early as 1992. So that was definitely a very fun discovery for me to make. Moving into the center, we do get a little information center. I love 80s and 90s cars that have this. It's telling me that my oil change is okay, my washer oil, my fluid levels are all good. I like this sort of Star Trek-y style thing. Then we have an aftermarket radio down below that with our power antenna switch, 2 climate control vents and our climate controls. This has electronic climate control, and I like how it's laid out. It has the digital readout for the temperature, which was futuristic for the time. And then we have our cigarette lighter and an additional, almost period correct, Alpine CD player down below. Then we do have our openable ashtray and the shifter. The shifter is tall and mighty, as one might think. However, what's taller and mightier is the handbrake. When you put up the handbrake, I think you might be able to see it from space. This thing gets up there. And unfortunately, I don't have an algebra book to cover it up with. Good grief. Anyway, no cup holders in the Thunderbird SC, so it fails the big friggin' bottle test. Wah, wah, wah. Then we have 2 interesting buttons. So we have our fog lamp switch. That's not really that interesting, but cool to note, I guess. But then we have our ride controls. So we can either leave it in firm or put it into auto. So it actually can stiffen up the suspension a little bit. Honestly, I played with the modes quite a bit. Didn't really notice a big difference. However, I'm sure on some chart, in some booklet, it tells you how much better or how much worse it is. Then we have the seats. The seats are comfortable, as you've noticed throughout the rest of the interior. It is this sort of powder blue, which I really, really like. It's very much of the era. The seats are very, very comfortable. American car seats in the late 80s and early 90s remain pretty much unrivaled in terms of comfort. And the Supercharged Thunderbird is the same way. However, we do have a fun little feature here because we don't have airbags. We have power seat belts. I have a whole video on my channel explaining these, but basically in the early 90s, the government was regulating you either needed passive restraints like power seat belts that the driver didn't have to actually do anything to secure, or you had to add airbags. A lot of companies ended up going with the seat belts. They were just easier to engineer and required less R&D. However, as we all know, airbags ended up winning out that battle. However, speaking of seats, we do have back seats. So let's go do a back seat review. All right, let's see here. So you just kind of fold the seat forward. Nothing really too crazy about that. Getting in here. All right, we're in the back of the Supercharged Ford Thunderbird. Nothing really too crazy to note. I fit back here, you know, my head's hitting the ceiling. It's not very comfy if I put the seat back. I could ride back here. If all my buddies were going to 7-Eleven and said, hey, jump in the back of the Thunderbird Super Coupe, I would do it and, you know, it would be fine. I don't want to ride cross country back here. For kids, this is going to be great. I am just no longer a kid, no matter what my pediatrician keeps saying as I keep trying to go to his office. So, unfortunately, no longer a child, so I don't really fit back here well, but that's kind of the use case scenario with a lot of coupes. Let's hop into the very back. We'll take a quick look at the trunk, and then we'll talk about the looks. Right around the back of the Thunderbird. Turn it there, and here is our trunk. Pretty sizable trunk. This is typical of American cars of the era. However, the owner has left some very cool things in here. This is the Marty Auto Works. This is technically a one of one because this is the only one with all these options, blah, blah, blah. Very, very cool stuff here. This is the Thunderbird and Cougar service manual. Love to see old stuff like this. Very, very neat. And overall, it is a very passable trunk. However, I do want to note, I am filming in Arizona. See, there's like a mountain thing. But the cool thing about it is that that is a Mexican market Suzuki. So I would love to run inside and ask them if I could review that, but I don't want to freak someone out by begging to drive a stranger's car. So very cool. I will post some pictures up of it there. That is awesome. But that is the trunk of the Thunderbird SC from 1992. Now we gotta talk about the looks. And I don't overly love the look of the Supercharged Thunderbird. I think this era of Thunderbird is kind of blobby. It kind of, to me, looks like if you described a Fox body Mustang over the phone to someone and then they tried to draw it from memory a week later. It has sort of those lines, which makes sense. Ford Motor Company in that era, of course. I've never fallen in love with it, but I do kind of like that this is basically a blue-collar Mustang. It's quick, it has the manual, it's fun, it's sporty, it's a coupe, but this just seems a little bit more approachable. This feels like something Uncle Buck would drive more so than Johnny down the street with his streaked hair and rolled up sleeves. I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into it. Let's get on to my final thoughts. What do I think driving a supercharged Ford Thunderbird here today? Well, this has been a really cool experience for nothing more than just driving a time capsule of this era. You know, like I said with the engine, this was a crossover era for Ford for many reasons. Not only because their supercharged technology was actually getting better than their NA V8 technology, but also in styling. This had rounded edges. This was sort of flowy. This was entering that Ford Taurus era of curviness. Now, quality wasn't super high. Although this is an extremely well-kept example, there's a lot of beeps, squeaks, and rattles coming from the interior. If I lean on anything, it sounds like the hull of the Titanic against the iceberg. But what I love about this car is the ethos of it. The fact that it isn't a Mustang, but it's doing Mustang things. It's like when you see the lunch lady at the boxing gym. It makes you scratch your head a little, but not in a bad way, not in a judgmental way, just in a, I never really thought about that kind of way. The Thunderbird was never really a fast car, at least the Thunderbirds that I've driven. They've been nice coupes, and especially going back to like the 60s with this, that was like a big comfortable cruiser. In the late 70s, that was another big comfortable cruiser. Thunderbird never really meant performance to me, so now to be driving a performance-oriented Thunderbird is a little bit of a juxtaposition, but again, a very welcome one. Sometimes when you change the recipe, you find something delicious. And that's what I like here. I also just love the fact that Ford themselves pretty much had to nerf this thing so it didn't beat their crown jewel pony car. For the same reason of why I look the way I do. If I had a chiseled jawline, I'd be the #1 YouTuber on earth, and that wouldn't be fair to the others. So here it is, a 68,000 miles supercharged Ford Thunderbird from 1992 in all of its original fantastic glory. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Huge thank you to Genesis for letting me borrow his Ford Thunderbird supercharged coupe, super cool, whatever you want to say SC means. He's been absolutely awesome. He also took me on an off-roading trip. You'll see that video on the channel if you haven't already, in a Lexus GX and a Toyota 4Runner. He's absolutely wonderful, and I appreciate his time down here in Phoenix, Arizona. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't forget to rate the video, comment on the video, and subscribe if you really liked it. Take care, guys.